For those of you who are watching, we recorded this Wednesday afternoon at 2, having a nice discussion about fake news and its effects on society today and some of the ways to identify items of fake news. Feel free, Tom and I are on and watching and part of this live stream broadcast, and we will answer your questions in real time. Simply comment in the comment box and we'll go from there.
I'm Dr. Thomas Hokanson. I'm an instructor at Red Lake Nation College. I teach classes in social and behavioral sciences, including political science, cultural geography, sociology.
I'm Jacob Starks. I am the librarian at Red Lake Nation College. And as a news consumer, I am always interested in learning more about the news that I consume. So let's talk about fake news. Let's talk about all of the things that you know we see out there. It's become a relatively new. It's not a new concept, but it's become newly popular, I'd say, here in the past few years. You got some that would call it alternate facts, and then you've got some that basically try to find some way to vet the truth so that when people see these various things, that there's fact checkers and things like that. When did you first really become aware or even concerned about the topic of fake news?
Well, it's really come on in the last couple of years. I pulled up an article from The Atlantic from last June called Some Real News About Fake News. And it has really become, in the minds of the public, a big issue. And it's split somewhat along political lines. So promoted more on with the Republicans and the president kind of using this tack of moving from what we used to call fake news. When I was younger, you'd think of fake news as The Onion, or what I call real fake news, things like the Enquirer back in the day, the National Enquirer, or I can't remember some of the names of the other tabloids that used to be there where, a woman had Bigfoot's baby, something like that.
What was it? The Global Enquirer, right? That boy, Global Enquirer. You see him in the shopping marts all the time.
Yeah, that was kind of the image of fake news. And part of it was lately it's all tied together. It's tied to politics. It's tied to technology. The thought was when the internet became more available to greater and greater number of people, and there was more of a diversity of news sources, the thought was that people would go and they would listen to different points of view, that they would use it to, I can listen to kind of libertarians news programs. I can listen to liberals. And you can do that. But a lot of people have chosen not to do that. What they've done is they find one that they like, and then that's all they listen to. They block out the others, and they listen to their own point of view. So it becomes kind of an echo chamber for a lot of people.
And when you're talking about that, that's sort of the concept of confirmation bias, right? That you sort of feed yourself the information that jives with your understanding or belief system. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes. And there's always, the thing is there's always been bias out there. Okay. Is news media bias? Yes, it always has been, but the effort was to minimize that, not to promote it, to promote the bias. Now you see a split. When you went back, when you had television, when everybody would watch the same news programs, when I was a kid, you'd ABC, NBC, CBS, you go watch the evening news with Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather. Was there a bias there? Yeah, there was, but it wasn't as obvious, and there was an effort to try and not be biased, I think. And now you see there's not even a pretense that you're not biased on a lot of programs. So if I want a liberal point of view on something, I go to MSNBC. If I want a more conservative point of view, I go to Fox News. So it's
Okay,
really,
and when we're talking about this, though, when we're talking liberal or conservative, in reference to what? Where's our center on that? Do we know anymore?
not really. I think there's been I would say a movement towards, how would you put it? It's almost a separate issue. You have the bias and the polarization is one issue, and then fake news is a part of that. Fake news is kind of a way to undercut any arguments. It's a way to shut down a conversation. So if I don't like what you're saying or what another station or another point of view is presenting, I can just say that's fake news, and it's meant to shut down conversation. It's not meant to have a real conversation going on. It's a way to shut
So
it.
that's kind of like being. I guess it was one of the equivalents would be like, well, I believe this, so there's no more argument. And you almost wonder why do people seek out these channels? Why? I mean, it sounds to me, just sitting here, like that what you would need as an informed citizen is literally today the sky was blue, the Reds beat the Dodgers 5-2, the subway was on time, and that would be like the news. And I guess people wouldn't tune into that, right?
Yeah. Well, and news is entertainment too. I mean, even more so than it was in the past. Before, people would go to, I think, get the main ideas from the news. Now it's a form of entertainment. So if you were to give the news like that, you're right. People would say this is boring. I'm going to go find something that's more interesting. That's you had the rise of Jon Stewart. That blurring of comedy and the news. You've had the blurring kind of going on for quite a while now.
Can you point to any particular moment in history where the tide started to change? Like, is there really any kind of, I mean, is it just that the introduction of cable meant that you could put different shades of the news out there, and so that's kind of what drove it? Or, I mean, is there a moment in our history where we just basically said, yes, we're going to do entertainment now?
And no, it's been a gradual buildup. I think it is tied to a lot to cable and to, we went to CNN, to a 24-hour news cycle, which people had to come up with news. I mean, there's always news out there, but you had to constantly be generating news, and people, just in looking at television, people wanted different news stories 24 hours a day. Well, now you have it not only on television, but on your phone. That's the thing that you see right now in terms of people crave news or entertainment, both combined all the time. It was interesting, I talked to a meteorologist out of the Twin Cities who's on a major channel, and he was talking about how that profession has changed so much. That it used to be, I'd come on and give the weather on the news, and that was it. He said, most of my job now, he says, is I'm nonstop Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all these different things. He said, because the people who are out there want news and information all the time, and so, and people don't want to hear, a lot of people don't want to hear people with opposing views to them. Sometimes they do. I'm a person who likes to listen to different people, people I don't agree with, but the thing to do is people ought to be listening to different points of view and evaluating them, and even going not just from their own perspective, but kind of looking at things, trying to see things from another person's point of view. So I may not agree with President Trump on certain issues, but in my political science class, I tell students, coming in and saying, "Oh, he's dumb," and shutting down conversation, that's not intelligent conversation. It's, why does he feel the way he does on this issue? Even if you don't agree with it, what is that perspective? And that's what I think is missing for a lot of people now. They don't care. They like to listen to themselves, and they want, again, that confirmation of their own views and stuff. And then I think a lot of it today has been brought on by the polarization politics. I mean, you've seen this in the last 20 years, less and less getting along, where compromise becomes a bad word in politics, which wasn't always the case. I mean, that was the art of governing, was to get people to come together and craft legislation that I get some of what I want, you get some of what you want. But now that's, if you compromise, you're seen as a sellout to those kind of on the extremes. So you've seen that polarization and this development of fake news. This idea of fake news kind of goes with that too.
I got you. Well, what I'd like to do right now is present a few of these sites that we can take a look at. And I just kind of want to get your take on just the content and whether or not these things, what's fake news and what's not. I think this would be kind of helpful. Here we have the National Enquirer. So clearly we're known, these are the guys that have the tabloids in the news there in the supermarkets. We've seen them for years. We don't know a whole lot about the stories. Is this more of a matter of like, I guess, saying this sells, and they've got people that have basically figured out that this story about Ryan Newman is going to move papers, so they print it? I mean, is that an accurate way of looking at it?
Well, they have to move papers, but what's interesting with the National Enquirer is President Trump's relationship with the owner of it before, that it was used politically to suppress stories. So it went from being purely a kind of more of a tabloid, fake news kind of thing I'd say in the 80s and 90s to I think more of their stories are legit. They're slanted, but they're legit. But also there's this that's come out now, that people who did have true stories that were trying to get information out there, those were purchased by the National Enquirer and then buried. And so it's been almost weaponized in a way.
So fake news by omission, right? If it's a real story, if it's a story that the American public would want to know, one of these outlets could purchase it and basically hide it.
Yep, that's what went on.
I hear you. Let's take a look at another one here. We know that The Onion, which calls itself America's finest news source, is a parody. This story is absolutely not true, but grinning Tim Cook announces new iPhone will no longer be compatible with AirPods. These sorts of things. What value do you see? Do you see these actually raising awareness of certain issues, or do you just see this purely as comedic entertainment, waste a few hours? Because I mean, you can look at these and it kind of looks like real articles if you didn't know any better.
Yeah, they catch people sometimes, where people will actually think they're real and they'll make their way into a newspaper or something like that. It's mostly entertainment on these.
Okay. You've got the news aggregators, and this is one that I think is really kind of interesting, because over time it's going to build up. As a librarian, I love things like this because it over time it builds up sort of what you're interested in and presents those sorts of ideas to you. The problem is it may present you your own bias, and you also are kind of subject to articles that you may not be able to read because they're behind a paywall. Like if the Wall Street Journal puts up an article, I'm only going to be able to read the first few sentences of it. And so you have to worry kind of about sourcing and curation. But these things are kind of interesting in terms of you get a picture of the news, but how do we know as news consumers, as students, how do we know that we're getting a complete and whole picture of the news? Like, are they keeping things, because I haven't clicked on anything about a certain topic, am I not seeing something that's very important?
Well, that kind of argues for the need to sample across different news sites. One of the ones that I go to quite often is the Drudge Report. I'll pull up Drudge Report just because they're quick putting up new news articles, and some of them are interesting. Some of the news that maybe wouldn't be something that would necessarily be something you think would be in national news. That'd be an example there. Kind of almost, this is almost like breaking news. Their main things at the top, and then they'll have other articles in there. And this has moved from a very more conservative point of view to a lot more critical of the president than it used to be. So you've seen kind of an evolution of political point of view in the Drudge Report over time. Used to be very, kind of just very supportive of kind of Republicans and conservative positions. And now it's pretty critical, and the president's noted that also. He said, oh, you see, I don't know what's happened to them,
I hear you. And then, when you get into some of the finer political news outlets, right, you see various shades of say, liberal or conservative views. I mean, The Hill is definitely conservative for the most part. However, it has liberal contributors and things of that nature. I look at them as well as Politico, right? And I see actually sort of a different. Well, that's wrong. I don't know why it gave me that. Oh, I typed it in wrong. See, and that's the other thing. If you type in the wrong address in a browser, it can take you wherever. But oftentimes I find that like Politico kind of covers political relationships and sort of opines or gives its opinion on sort of the how the politics work, whereas The Hill sort of reports what happens. But I find that both of those are probably to the right of center just a little bit. Just real quick, before we get into the final part and talk a little bit about the concepts that we've looked at today, there's one site that I've been curious about because it's so based on numbers. And as a news consumer, I've learned over the years that you can make numbers say pretty much whatever you want them to if you find the right numbers. But I mean, on a site like this, do you see more or less bias if you've got polling and things of that nature backing it up?
A lot of it goes with the reputation of who's putting the numbers together. Like you said, you can make the numbers say pretty much what you want it to say. But there's a lot of reputable um, groups that put out information. The thing is how it's perceived. I mean, uh, with the president and getting back to our topic on, specifically on fake news, you can dismiss that. That's the thing with the fake news is I can look at those numbers, and even if they're documented and absolutely correct, I can just wave my hand and say fake news. That's fake news, and that kind of, for a large segment of the population, that's what they do. It's kind of interesting. I have an article. I can't pull it up there. The article I was looking at had a couple things. In terms of the importance people think of fake news right now, they said, according to the Pew Research Center, they said Americans now rate fake news as a larger problem than racism, climate change, or terrorism. That's how passionate people are on this topic of fake news, which is hard to believe. They had some other, couple other things I'll bring up. They said, Republicans are more likely than Democrats to see made-up news as a serious problem for the country, especially for more conservative. The more conservative you are, the bigger problem you think it is. And another thing they had was they said large majorities of both parties say made-up news and information led them to check facts and news stories, but how are they checking that? A lot of people are, again, that echo chamber. They say they're checking the facts, but all they're doing is going to sites that they like to, if it comes out and they didn't like it, then they'll go to a site that they agree with and say, I knew it was fake. And then they'll look at another site that has their point of view and they'll say, more confirmation that these people are liars.
Yeah. And so some of it's incumbent upon us to do our fact checks. When we're doing our fact checks, I mean, I've always liked Snopes. My favorite was a long time ago that came out that there was a thing circulating on the internet that Mr. Ed was a zebra. That because of black and white camera technology, they had to use it, and the size needed, they needed to use a zebra, and Mr. Ed was actually a zebra. And Snopes does a really great job of explaining everything about this bizarre story, and then also talks about, whether or not these things are true or false, and this being a lost legend, if you read through all of this, it basically lets you know that this was not true. It was a false authority. And you can really go through their home stuff as these various things are popping up, and see sort of the hot 50, right? The top fake news that are spreading that they see. But my question has always been, how can you be sure that they're correct, sort of deal?
Yeah, that's the question. And the danger in all the talk about fake news, and there's a really good, if people want to see something, there's a really, really good speech by Senator Jeff Flake out of Arizona. If you Google in Jeff Flake, defense of the press, something like that, where he talks about the danger all of this poses to the country. all the ideas of fake news and alternative facts and things like that. And
we can make sure that we make this link available
yeah,
at the end of the broadcast.
yeah, it's a fantastic. I show it in my classes. And another thing to do is, we don't want to build up any more skepticism that people already have of the news. I mean, there should be an acceptance of that there's some bias and trying to understand it. I try to find what I consider more moderate voices when I'm presenting things in my class. I'm a Democrat, but I like David Brooks, who's I consider more of a liberal Republican. So more towards the middle, rather than, a lot of voices on the edges. And it's kind of interesting when we look at in terms of the entertainment value of in the news. Conservative voices have really dominated over the years. The Rush Limbaugh's, Michael Savage. You get even even more extreme, kind of the Alex Joneses, Infowars, those kind of voices out there. You'll get people who are like me who don't agree with it at all, but some of it is so outrageous that it's entertaining. So you get the viewers like myself who are tuning in and listening, going, "Oh, I can't believe he said that." Well, it's been a little, and that's drawn in. I think explains why some of those voices on the right have been more popular than kind of left-wing efforts to match that. I think remember back when Al Franken tried to do the same kind of thing and just not as successful as Rush Limbaugh and other voices over there, or Sean Hannity. There's an example.
Very true. So to kind of wrap up, I was looking at different ways to go through this, and I found Craig Silverman's. This is through Checkology.org and the News Literacy Project. And they've got 6 steps, and I kind of want to run through them with you just to go and see if whether or not this is sort of what you would, endorse as a good way of deciding whether or not you're looking at a fake news site or something of theirs. The first suggestion, of course, is to check the URL, like where is this from? If it's from, Balloons and More, is that really a valid is that a valid source? Or if the story isn't being reported by any other news outlet in the world, could that be a thing? And then sometimes there's a big difference between the New York Times and the New York Post. I'm not off on that, am I?
No.
Big difference. So, I mean, a lot of times you got to look at things like that. The About page, of course, on some of these sites will be saying either silly things or talking about satire or something that sort of clarifies so that they don't get into trouble for things like libel, right? Or copyright infringement, intellectual property right, misappropriation, things like that. Key quotes, that's kind of tough, isn't it, to try to verify key quotes on number 3?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it up here.
Number 3 is verify key quotes under Craig Silverman's 6 steps to spot fake news and other misinformation.
Yeah, that is difficult. Again, if it's from multiple sources, it would be a lot more trustworthy. If unless they're all generating out of the same, that's been a problem too. They all take a quote and then they all use the same quote from a different place. There it is.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
so if someone takes one quote and publishes it, we never really got to the bottom of, and I don't know if you remember this, but this was about a year and a half ago. BuzzFeed News came out and said that so-and-so in the Mueller investigation, that they were going to come out and charge so-and-so, or I forget what the exact story was, but basically it never happened. Mueller issued a statement to correct the story. It was one of the rare statements that came out of that. And, everybody went with it, though, when BuzzFeed went with it, because they felt that BuzzFeed had probably done their research. So sometimes you can have some mistaken information out there that's all repeating the same source.
Yeah, that happens from time to time.
And then, of course, you want to check the links, because a lot of times you've got clickbait and things like that. And then if the source goes to, a place that's trying to sell you chocolate pudding rather than, the actual record or whatever is being referenced, then you definitely know you're looking at something fake. And then, of course, images, the technology with Photoshop and deep fakes and things like that, it's getting harder to tell when you see something whether or not you're watching an edited video, whether or not you're seeing an undoctored photo. So, I mean, it's getting to the point where you want to try to find that image on some reputable news sites. And the problem is that, like we were saying at the beginning, you've got news sites that give you, sort of the left and the right political perspective, and hopefully they're sharing the same images. But a lot of times you've got CNN showing an angry Donald Trump and Fox News showing a happy Donald Trump. And it's very difficult, if you're a news consumer, to be able to tell, which is accurate and which isn't.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I tell my students that, you should, when you are consuming news, if it is a conservative and a more liberal point of view, go and watch both, and realize that, the truth is probably somewhere in between, somewhere in between. But at least you're getting both, both perspectives of the same issue. It's kind of like when you're looking at, if I said, I want you to look at this from an economic point of view, if you break down some issue, look at it purely from an economic point of view, you can do that. You can step outside your own politics and try and look at it economically. And it's kind of doing the same thing politically. So kind of stepping out from where you are and trying to see those different points of view.
Makes sense. This last point here on Silverman's how to spot fake news is more of like a step that someone should take, which is slow down. If the story seems too perfect or too good to be true, or if it gives you a strong emotional reaction, outrage, anger, etc., slow down for a moment and check it out. And I think that's also slow down for a moment before you start sharing on Facebook and emailing to all your friends and family members and saying, see, I told you so, or something like that. The problem is that we have the ability today to share misinformation just as fast as real information. And just to kind of close, what do you think the responsibility of educated members of society really comes down to on this issue? What do people need to know about the effects of, say, going out and sharing misinformation?
Well, I think people have to be very careful about sharing information generally. I just read a book called Antisocial, and it talked about kind of alt-right groups and kind of movement into politics and how they try to, again, clickbait, try to create headlines that are completely false, but create an emotional reaction among with the people watching it, so that they'll click on the story. And maybe the story doesn't even hardly have anything to do with what the headline was. It's just to get you to click. People need to be aware of that on Facebook stories and things like that. When you see all these different, they look like interesting articles. I was doing this, and who could believe that this happened? These headlines like that, and you're like, oh, I want to know what happened. And so you click on it. Those kinds of things you have to be very wary of. And it might be to stay to, more established news sources, whether they are more conservative or they're more liberal, but they have at least some kind of reputation rather than just pulling from somewhere, that you don't know anything about where that particular news story is coming from.
Well, and one of the things that I always found strange about that is that, like, if you go to a real news site, such as, CNN or one of these, all you have to do is scroll down to paid content on any article that you read, and all of a sudden you get these, other sources of things. Here's a guy that bought Apple shares at $1.42, and now he's a millionaire, I'm sure, because they all are. And then there's these. I mean, this looks like an actual news page, and it has here it is right on CNN. So I mean, a lot of times this isn't the news. This is advertising, but these companies, because this generates revenue for them, they're placing this on their content.
Yep. Yeah. Again, you got to be very careful.
Well, I appreciate your time today. Is there anything else that we should know, or anything else that we should cover in this presentation on fake news?
Well, we haven't talked a lot about this president in particular, who has taken this idea of fake news to a whole nother level. Watched, I think it was a Frontline special back during the first campaign against Hillary Clinton, where they looked at each of the candidates. I can't remember if it was called The Choice or The Candidate or something like that, where they talked about Donald Trump's background and his growing up. And if you watch that and you get kind of a psychological profile of him as an individual, he grew up as a child, and his father told him, if 100 people are in a race and you take second place, that's nothing to be proud of. That means you're the number one loser. So if you keep that in mind, it helps explain some of his points of view. Why is it such a big deal that his inauguration, his crowd wasn't as big as Obama's? Why is that such a big deal to him? Well, if you go back and watch something like that, you see that's how he was raised. To be number one on everything. I'm the best on everything. I'm number one on everything. Everything I do, I don't make mistakes. Everything I do is perfect. Perfect call, perfect this, perfect that. That goes way back. I think we'll have, when he leaves, whether he's defeated this term or if he's elected again, after he leaves, I think we'll have kind of a return to normalcy, I guess you would say. I don't think we'll have somebody as extreme as him in terms of throwing out things like fake news. I think you'll still have conservatives and liberals. You'll have different points of view, but I don't think you'll have this kind of undermining of what is truth, what is fake that you have right now. I think it's kind of a unique situation with this president. And I think that this will tend to fade a little bit after he's out of office, would be my own guess.
If we're looking at that, have you done any research on like what it's looking like in other countries right now? I mean, I know that with the UK, you've got Brexit as being sort of a polarizing issue. But everywhere else in the world, are we seeing sort of the same fake news being problematic?
Yes, we are. They're parroting the language of this president in different countries. So you've seen it in different places, and usually to the detriment of democracy. So it's been kind of used by autocrats across the world to suppress discussion, suppress opposition, um, and that's sad, and that's what's been going on. And you don't really see that, you know, belief in journalism, in journalists and the free press. You don't have a champion in charge of the United States who's promoting that worldwide. You have this kind of undermining within the United States, and that's being picked up all over the world. Now, he may leave. He will leave eventually, whether it's now coming up or if he's reelected in 4 years. But the damage that's been done worldwide may be a bigger issue than what we'll see in the United States. I think we'll have a return to, I would say, less entertainment, less polarization, I think, would be my guess in the future. Whether this coronavirus kind of brings us together or not, we'll have to see when this is done. But I think we're in a unique time.
Well, Tom, I appreciate your time today. Appreciate those who've commented along as we've done our presentation today, and I believe we've all learned a little bit more about fake news.